my experience, I've done a bit of dabbling in like red pill stuff and whatnot, and eventually my conclusion was these guys are just very resentful, and instead of choosing to do something about this, they choose to complain,
Yeah.
and that's just not and something that doesn't appeal to me. I'm not somebody who likes complaining.
Yeah. Maybe
So
just for a bit of context, like Red Pill is like a community of, it comes from the Matrix originally, right? Take the red pill to see the truth.
yeah,
But as I understand it, it's mostly bitter men who are like, the truth is all women are
yeah,
terrible and you have to like this kind of thing, right?
yeah. It really paints women in a negative picture. Like for example, Ryan and I, he's on the team. We both read the book The Rational Male at the same time.
Mm.
And the way I like to read, I read 10 pages a day and then I go on with my life. And this guy got sucked in. He read the whole thing. And he's like, dude, women are crazy. I'm like, what are you talking about? Where is this coming from? Right. And he's like, yeah, I'm feeling so much resentment towards women and whatnot. And I read more of the book. I eventually read just half of it and tossed it
Mm.
essentially because I was starting to feel the same thing. And I would walk around and thinking, oh, look at her, like so privileged, and there's no, she has no idea how difficult it is to be a man person, right? You do get bitter,
Hmm.
and I watched some content about it. The problem is, I feel like those guys they expect that women are somehow like they're not just as human as we are. Therefore, any of their mistakes should be magnified 1,000 times. And look, it was because they hate men, and it's just not true.
Yeah. I
And
mean, I think
yeah,
that a lot of this stuff, I mean, look, to be honest, I have a lot of empathy for people in these circles. I think that a lot of this stuff, like red pill and men going their own way and this, MGTOW and whatnot, it has, and I say this with a lot of affection, but it has very strong upset toddler energy, right? It's like someone's been hurt, and it is like that inner toddler who kind of can't deal with it. The only thing they can do is like cry in desperate frustration, and just be angry. They're so angry at the person who hurt them. And then that is extended to include just all females. Um, and like I understand that, pain very well. But it is essentially that like toddler level reaction. It's a very immature reaction. And it's really just like, obviously it ends up making you feel better if you just feel like, well, all forms of superiority, right? Superiority is always like, whether it's like white supremacy or something like essentially that's the misogyny or something. It's always an easy out because you can say, look, by birthright I am better and I am right and nobody can take that away from me. And you're so indignant and angry about it. So I get it, but it is essentially a toddler outburst, I think.
fair enough. And like in my mind, I think I equated that to complaining. That's what I called it, right?
Mm.
Yeah, it's just not appealing to me. Like 'cause I think very much in terms of you. Like, okay, situation foobar, fair enough. What can I control? Let's go control that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But okay, so the reason I've been bringing, I know I'm touching on like anything and everything right now, and it's because I'm trying to build this picture of what I think you mean
Mm.
when you said it at the very beginning of the previous episode of this podcast. When you look at an animal that's caged,
Mm.
you just feel sorry for it, right? So would it be correct to say that this is some form of a depiction of the human zoo that we're in?
Yeah. Well, I would say that um, it can be because, so if we're talking specifically about the red pill stuff, I mean, a community like that, that's just one example of what you could call like a radicalized community where it is an expression of the human zoo because we have a far greater number of radicalized communities. So communities with like fringe beliefs or just like extreme worldviews. So that includes conspiracy stuff, which I've mentioned in previous episodes, has made a few people angry, right? But the reason we have this kind of stuff, the reason we have, and this is going to be me, saying something that's an unpleasant truth, but I believe it is a truth. It's like essentially things like MGTOW and Red Pill, especially more extreme forms of that, essentially belong in the same category as QAnon and anti-vax and flat earth and millions of other splinter groups of just very extreme beliefs where people end up in these tiny, very tightly controlled bubbles. And there's usually a radicalization pathway. So that leads from something like someone got stood up on a date and they look for a video, how do I not get stood up on a date on YouTube? And the recommendation algorithm, which is trying to maximize how much attention or how much time this person spends on YouTube, will recommend more and more extreme stuff. And so in this example, right, we have someone who's right now feeling hurt because he got stood up on a date. And originally he just wants to find some advice. How do I make sure this doesn't happen again? Or why do women do this or something? And gets shown things that really feed into this anger. The truth about women who stand you up, they're all whores. And then here's the scientific truth that shows that women are terrible and blah, 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 right? And so then that feeds into that. In that moment, you're like, yeah, fuck them. How dare they do this to me, right? It feeds that emotion. And it shoves people down these radicalization pipelines into more and more extreme views. So you go from, hey, I'm a bit upset because I got stood up on a date, to all women are terrible, and I'm never going to marry, and I'm only going to use women. I'm going to manipulate them and use them, but I'm never going to treat them well. And that is something that happens because if you're in one of these radicalized bubbles, you're a very, very highly engaged user of an online platform. That's basically what it comes down to, right? It's like this system has just found a way to serve you more ads. And it happens to fuck you up, right? It happens to fuck up your entire worldview and make you miserable. And possibly also tear apart the fabric of our society, as Chamath has put it. But hey, ad revenue is important, right? So in that sense, yes, it is an expression of the human zoo. It's like this stuff exists because of this kind of somewhat dystopian, some of the more dystopian aspects of the world that we happen to live in. And it is a form of the human zoo because in a more humane context, something much better would have happened. In a more humane context, you would have been able to express your resentment and your pain of being stood up to other people in your social circle. Maybe some mentor figures, right? Maybe some older men who can empathize with you and say, yes, I know that sucks, and I'm going to take you under my wing, and I'm going to teach you a thing or two about the game of love, essentially. And so then I'm going to basically make sure that you can process this pain that you experienced, that you can put it into a good context, and that you can use this to maybe learn something that will ensure that you have a better experience in the future. And instead of being shoved down some weird tunnel of YouTube videos that make you angrier and angrier, you end up going on another date with a girl, and having someone who has your back, and then you maybe can learn something about building a relationship with someone, or about just dating and all this kind of stuff, and you have a much better experience, right? I think that is what's supposed to happen. I think that is, if you could design a human community from scratch, you would never arrive at the point where nobody gets hurt, right? You would never arrive at the point where nobody gets stood up on a date. But you could arrive at a point where there's a way to process these difficult things that leads to a positive outcome.